The train from Appenzell had deposited him at the valley station just as the morning mist began lifting from the meadows, revealing the Alps in their April glory. Our cheesemaker, let us observe him closely, for he deserves our attention, stood on the platform with his single leather trunk, breathing in air that carried hints of snow melt and fresh grass. 42 years had carved their marks into his face, crow's feet from squinting into aging caves, hands roughened by brine and pressing cloths, a slight stoop from years of turning heavy wheels in low-ceilinged cellars. Strange how life pivots on small notices in trade papers. Experienced master sought for ancient cheese caves of Chateau Kellenberg, the advertisement had read. The salary was triple his current earnings. More importantly, perhaps, it offered distance from memories that haunted his workshop back home. The empty chair by the fire, the unused spinning wheel gathering dust these 5 years since tuberculosis claimed Marie. The cart ride to the chateau wound through pastures where brown cows grazed with their brass bells, creating a symphony that seemed older than the mountains themselves. The driver, a taciturn fellow with tobacco-stained whiskers, pointed out landmarks with grunts rather than words. "Baron's land starts there," he mumbled, indicating a stone marker carved with a coat of arms featuring 3 wheels of cheese beneath a rampant lion. Chateau Kellenberg emerged from behind a grove of ancient oaks like something from a Gothic romance, all towers and buttresses, though our cheesemaker's practical eye noted the new telegraph wires strung to the eastern tower and modern glass in what had once been arrow slits. Progress, it seemed, had found even this remote fortress.
Baron Friedrich von Kellenberg received him in a study that reeked of lamp oil and anxiety. The man was 58 years of carefully maintained dignity, waxed mustaches, a velvet smoking jacket, and eyes that darted constantly to the telegraph apparatus in the corner.
"Welcome, welcome," he said, though his handshake was distracted. "Hans will show you the caves, extraordinary caves. Been making cheese there since the year 1200 and something." A telegram clicked to life, and the Baron's attention snapped to it like a hunting dog catching scent. Hans Gruber proved to be everything the Baron was not. Solid, present, carved from the same limestone as the mountains. 15 years in the caves had given him the pallor of mushrooms and the sure-footedness of a cave spider. "This way, master," he said, lighting a lantern. "Mind yourself on the old steps."
They've known too many centuries to care about our modern bones.
The descent into the caves felt like traveling backward through time itself. Each level down brought new sensations. First, the coolness that never knew summer, then the mineral smell of limestone and aging cheese, finally the profound silence that seemed to swallow even their footsteps. The cheesemaker had worked in many caves, but these were different. The ceiling showed chisel marks from medieval tools. Wooden racks, black with age, held wheels of Gruyere in various stages of their long transformation. 13 separate chambers, Hans explained, his voice echoing strangely. Each with its own personality, you might say. Temperature, humidity, airflow, all different. They passed through vaulted rooms where thousands of wheels rested like golden coins in a giant's treasury. The wealth here was staggering, probably worth more than most banks held in their vaults. In the 7th chamber, Hans paused.
His lantern light fell upon a single wheel set apart on an ornate iron stand. The cheese was magnificent, probably 18 months old, with a rind that showed the complex patterns of natural aging. "The oracle," Hans said simply. "Baron's great-grandfather started the tradition, or noticed it, depending on who tells the story." Our cheesemaker approached the cheese with professional interest. The blue-green veining on its surface was indeed unusual. Not the ordinary bloom of Penicillium roqueforti, but something more delicate, more specific to these caves. "The pattern?" he asked. Hans shrugged. "When it shows a crack, a line straight across like God himself scored it with his thumbnail, then 7 days later the markets fall. Been happening for 60 years, regular as clockwork. Well, irregular as clockwork, since markets don't fall on schedule. But when they do fall, the oracle knows first." Fascinating. The cheesemaker's fingers itched to examine the cheese more closely, but he sensed ceremony here, tradition that shouldn't be disturbed on his first day. "How often?" "3 times since I've been here. Each time the Baron saved a fortune by selling early. Other families, old names, good people, ruined. But not the Kellenbergs. The oracle protects them." They continued the tour, but our cheesemaker's mind remained in that 7th chamber. That evening, unpacking his few belongings in the small but comfortable room above the dairy, he found himself thinking about patterns, about the human need to find meaning in chaos. From his window he could see the Baron's study, where lamplight burned late into the night. The constant clatter of the telegraph drifted across the courtyard. Zurich, Geneva, Paris, London. The whole nervous system of European finance terminated in that tower room, where an aging aristocrat hunched over his desk, reading numbers that meant fortune or ruin. The traditional evening meal in the servants' hall introduced him to the household's rhythm. Anna Weiss, a girl of perhaps 19 with intelligent eyes, served a soup rich with cream and herbs. The others, gardeners, stable hands, 2 elderly housemaids, ate with the focused attention of those who knew the value of good food. Conversation flowed in the local dialect, discussions of weather and cows and whose daughter was marrying whom in the village. Only later, lying in his narrow bed, listening to the chateau settle into sleep, did our cheesemaker allow himself to fully absorb the strangeness of his new position. Somewhere below, in caves that had sheltered cheese through wars and plagues and revolutions, an oracle waited to speak its next prophecy. And somehow, improbably, his skill with curds and cultures had brought him here to witness it. May arrived with uncommon warmth that year, bringing early wildflowers to the alpine meadows and a restlessness to the chateau that our cheesemaker could feel in his bones. He had settled into the rhythm of the caves now, the pre-dawn descent, the careful turning of wheels, the monitoring of temperatures that varied by fractions of degrees. His improvements were already showing results: better moisture distribution, more consistent aging. The Baron, when he noticed anything beyond his telegrams, seemed pleased. It happened on a Tuesday morning, the 12th of May, 1883. Hans arrived in the caves earlier than usual, his face pale even by his cave-dweller standards. "Master," he said, and that single word carried weight. "You need to see." The 7th chamber felt different even before they entered it. The air moved strangely, carrying a metallic taste our cheesemaker couldn't quite place. And there, on the oracle, the pattern. A line of blue-green mold ran across the cheese's surface, straight as a surveyor's mark, dividing it into 2 perfect hemispheres. Beautiful in its way. Terrible if you believed. "Fetch the Baron," our cheesemaker said quietly. Hans was already moving. Baron von Kellenberg arrived, still in his dressing gown, telegraph forms clutched in one hand, spectacles askew. He stood before the oracle like a penitent before an altar, studying the pattern with eyes that held both fear and a strange excitement. 7 days, he whispered. We have 7 days. The household transformed. Where before there had been the lazy rhythm of a rural estate, now came urgent activity. The Baron spent every waking hour in his study, telegrams flying to brokers in Zurich, Paris, London. Sell orders, our cheesemaker gathered from overheard fragments. Everything liquidated, converted to gold or government bonds. Curious about this prophecy that commanded such respect, our cheesemaker began his own observations. The 7th chamber, he noticed, had peculiar air currents. Standing in certain spots, he could feel the faintest draft on his cheek, warmer than the cave's usual chill. The source seemed to be somewhere above, perhaps a natural fissure in the limestone. He made notes in his journal, sketching the chamber's layout, marking where the air moved differently. On the 3rd day after the pattern's appearance, he met Matilda von Kellenberg for the first time. The Baron's daughter had returned from visiting friends in Bern, bringing with her the energy of a different world. 24 years old, educated in Paris, she moved through the chateau like a force of nature, barely contained by corsets and propriety. Our cheesemaker encountered her in the library, where he had gone searching for information about the cave's construction. "You're the new cheesemaker," she said, not a question. Her eyes, the same gray as her father's but without his anxiety, studied him with scientific interest.
Papa says you're very skilled. From Appenzell.
He acknowledged this with a nod, returning his attention to the architectural folios spread on the reading table. But Mathilde wasn't easily dismissed. "You don't believe in the oracle," she said. Again, not a question. "I believe in what I can measure, miss. Temperature, humidity, the action of cultures on milk proteins." She laughed, a sound too large for the dusty library. "How refreshing. Everyone here treats that cheese like it's the oracle at Delphi, including Papa, who should know better." She moved closer, looking at the plans he studied. "These are from the renovation in 1792. My great-great-grandfather added the ventilation shafts. See here?" Her finger traced lines on the yellowed paper. "Connected the caves to the main house to improve air circulation. Cheese needs to breathe," he wrote in his journal. Interesting. Our cheesemaker made note of this, even as he noticed Mathilde's fingers, ink-stained, with a small scar from some chemical burn. Not the hands of a typical baron's daughter. "You study natural sciences," he observed. "When I can. When Papa isn't trying to marry me off to some Bernese banker." She pulled another folio from the shelf. "Here, the original 13th century plans. You can see how they modified the natural caves, added chambers. Quite ingenious, really." That evening, the 4th since the pattern appeared, tension filled the chateau like smoke before a storm. The Baron hadn't emerged from his study all day. Anna Weiss, serving dinner, dropped a plate, unprecedented in the weeks our cheesemaker had been here. Even Hans seemed affected, forgetting to salt one batch of fresh cheese. Unable to sleep, our cheesemaker descended to the caves near midnight, drawn by professional curiosity and something else, a need to understand this hold the oracle had over rational people. In the 7th chamber, he conducted a simple experiment. Lighting a candle, he moved it slowly around the room, watching how the flame behaved. Near the back wall, it flickered consistently, pulled by that mysterious draft. Standing on a crate, he could reach the ceiling where the draft originated. His fingers found not solid limestone, but a grating, painted to match the stone. Old iron, the same vintage as the oracle's stand. Through it came air that was definitely warmer than the caves, carrying the faintest trace of lamp oil? The realization struck him like cold water. But before he could investigate further, footsteps echoed in the passage. He quickly descended, replacing the crate as Hans appeared with his lantern. "Couldn't sleep either, master." "The cheese never sleeps," our cheesemaker replied, an old saying from his apprentice days. Hans nodded, seeming to accept this, though his eyes lingered on the candle in our cheesemaker's hand. Day 5 brought news that vindicated the oracle's reputation. Markets in Vienna showed instability. A major bank had quietly stopped lending. The Baron, for the first time in days, appeared at dinner, looking exhausted but triumphant. "2 more days," he announced to the household. "Then we'll see who doubts our traditions." Our cheesemaker spent day 6 in careful observation, not of cheese, but of the household. He noticed things. How Hans always positioned himself between visitors and certain parts of the caves. How the Baron's lamp burned through the night when he wrestled with financial decisions. How Anna Weiss lingered near doorways when the Baron discussed business, her intelligent eyes absorbing everything. Day 7 arrived gray and oppressive, with clouds pressing low on the mountains. The telegraph in the Baron's study chattered constantly. Then, just after noon, a longer message. The Baron emerged, looking like a man who had wrestled with angels and won.
"The Bourse has crashed," he announced. 3 banks failed in Zurich. The Oracle was right. The Oracle is always right.
That night, as the household celebrated their master's financial salvation, our cheesemaker stood in the 7th chamber, studying the oracle by lantern light. The pattern remained, that perfect line across the cheese's surface. Beautiful, mysterious, but not, he was beginning to suspect, supernatural. June brought its own revelations to Chateau Kellenberg, though none as dramatic as the oracle's prophecy. The crash had been severe. Our cheesemaker learned the details from newspapers that Anna Weiss carefully saved after the Baron discarded them. 23 businesses bankrupted in Zurich alone. Fortunes that had taken generations to build evaporated in hours. Yet the Baron's wealth remained intact, even grew as he bought distressed assets at fraction prices. The peculiar thing about triumph, our cheesemaker observed, was how quickly it became ordinary.
Within a fortnight, the household returned to its rhythms, though with subtle changes. The Baron walked with more confidence, his faith in family tradition now unshakable. Hans carried himself with the pride of a man guarding sacred mysteries. Only Mathilde seemed troubled, spending long hours in the library, emerging with books on chemistry and atmospheric sciences. It was during the evening milking, the 20th of June, when our cheesemaker noticed Anna Weiss in the dairy's corner, hunched over something hidden in her apron. Her concentration was so complete she didn't hear his approach until he stood beside her. A newspaper, 2 days old, spread across her lap. Her finger traced the words slowly, lips moving silently. "The financial reports?" he asked gently. She started, face flushing with shame and defiance in equal measure. "I'm not stealing it, master."
The Baron, he throws them away after reading.
"I said nothing about stealing."
He pulled up a milking stool, sitting at a respectful distance. "The words are difficult?" "Some. The German is different from how we speak here. And these terms, commodity futures, sterling conversion rates, might as well be Latin." Our cheesemaker found himself making a decision that surprised him. "I could explain them, if you wish. Evening lessons, perhaps, after the household settles?" Her eyes widened with something between hope and suspicion. "Why would you?" Why indeed? Perhaps because he recognized something of himself in her hunger for understanding. Or perhaps because in this chateau of ancient traditions and mysterious prophecies, the simple act of learning felt like rebellion. "Knowledge shouldn't be hoarded like cheese in a cave," he said finally. Their lessons began 3 nights later, conducted in the dairy after Hans made his final rounds.
Anna proved quick-minded, grasping concepts that had taken our cheesemaker years to understand. She was particularly fascinated by the relationship between weather, harvests, and market prices. The vast web of cause and effect that connected a drought in Argentina to the price of bread in Basel. Meanwhile, his investigation of the caves continued with methodical patience. The architectural plans Matilda had shown him revealed a complex network of modifications made over centuries. The ventilation shafts, added in 1792, were particularly intriguing. One set connected to the chateau's kitchen chimneys, sensible for drawing smoke away. But another set, barely marked on the plans, seemed to connect to the eastern tower. The Baron's study was in the eastern tower. Testing his theory required patience. Our cheesemaker began tracking patterns. When the Baron's lamp burned late, how the air in the 7th chamber changed, whether wind direction affected the mysterious drafts. He filled 3 journals with observations, coded in the shorthand he developed over years of cheese-making notes. July arrived with heat that made the caves more valuable than ever. The temperature below remained constant, while the world above sweltered. It was perfect for the cheeses, which continued their slow transformation toward perfection. Our cheesemaker had improved production by 15% already, small innovations that added up, better brining schedules, optimal turning frequencies, minor adjustments to humidity that made major differences in quality. On the feast day of St. Mary Magdalene, the 22nd of July, Dr. Emil Rosenberg arrived for his monthly visit to check on the Baron's persistent dyspepsia. The doctor was 51, with wild Einstein hair before Einstein made it fashionable, and eyes that seemed to see through flesh to the soul beneath. He found our cheesemaker in the caves, conducting what had become routine quality inspections.
"You're the new master Hans speaks of," Rosenberg said, extending a hand that had probably delivered half the babies in the valley. "He says you're too curious for your own good." "Curiosity is just another word for professional thoroughness, Doctor." Rosenberg laughed, a rich sound that echoed off the limestone. "Spoken like a true empiricist. I hear you don't believe in our famous oracle." "I believe in what I observe." "And what have you observed?" Our cheesemaker chose his words carefully. Trust was earned slowly in these mountains. "I've observed that patterns in nature often have natural explanations, even when those patterns seem miraculous." The doctor studied him for a long moment. "Would you care to continue this discussion over wine?"
"I have an evening free, and philosophical conversations are rare in these parts." That evening, in Rosenberg's study, a chaos of medical texts, geological specimens, and what appeared to be an partially dissected clockwork, they talked until past midnight. The doctor was that rare breed,
educated in Zurich and Vienna, but choosing to practice in the countryside, bringing modern medicine to people who still believed illness came from evil eyes and curses. "The Baron is a good man," Rosenberg said, refilling their glasses with local wine. "But he's trapped between worlds, modern enough to play the stock markets, traditional enough to believe cheese can predict crashes. The contradiction doesn't trouble him because he doesn't examine it." "And his daughter?" "Ah, Mathilde. Now there's a mind that could have graced any university, if universities admitted women to anything beyond painting classes. She corresponds with scientists in Paris, you know."
Under a male pseudonym. He paused, swirling his wine.
"She's in love with young Professor Weber from Bern, a geologist. The Baron won't hear of it. Wants her to marry money, not rocks." Our cheesemaker filed this information away, another piece in the puzzle of Chateau Kellenberg. "And Hans? 15 years in the caves, you said. He must have seen patterns of his own." Rosenberg's expression grew careful. "Hans is complicated. His brother lost everything in the crash of '73. The Oracle didn't warn them, you see. They weren't Kellenbergs. Hans has been entrepreneurial about sharing certain observations with local merchants. Nothing treasonous, just evening the odds a bit." Fascinating. Our cheesemaker walked home through the summer darkness, his mind turning over everything he'd learned.
Anna's secret education, Mathilde's scientific interests, Hans's side business, the Baron's absolute faith in tradition, all of it circled around that cheese in the seventh chamber like planets around a sun. Back in his room, he made more notes, sketching diagrams of airflow, tracking correlations. The truth was there, hidden in the data like veins of blue in cheese. He just needed to be patient, to observe, to wait for the pattern to reveal itself completely. August descended on the valley like a wool blanket, thick and suffocating. Even the morning milking happened in a haze of heat that made the cows irritable and the milk yield thin. Our cheesemaker found himself rising at 3 to complete the most delicate work before the sun turned the dairy into an oven. Only the caves remained constant, their limestone embrace cool as ever. The heat affected everyone differently. The Baron retreated to his study with its northern exposure, emerging only for meals where he picked at cold dishes and complained about the telegraph lines. The heat made them unreliable, messages arriving garbled or delayed. Mathilde took to reading in the caves themselves, bringing a cushion and lamp to a dry alcove in the third chamber. Hans grew even paler, if such a thing were possible, spending 18 hours a day underground. Our cheesemaker used the excuse of checking temperatures to explore every corner of the cave system. In the 4th week of July, he'd discovered something intriguing. Iron brackets in the ceiling of the 7th chamber, painted over, but clearly designed to hold something. Now, in August's heat, he found their purpose in the chateau's attic. The attic was stifling, full of centuries of accumulated history, portraits of stern ancestors, furniture that had gone out of fashion when Napoleon was young, and in the corner, covered by a dusty sheet, equipment. Old ventilation fans, hand-cranked, with long leather belts that would have connected to the brackets below. A system for forcing air through the caves, abandoned probably when the new shafts were installed in 1792. Finding anything interesting? Mathilde stood in the attic doorway, dressed in a simple working dress, her hair pinned up carelessly. She looked younger, less like a baron's daughter, and more like the scientist she wanted to be.
"Your ancestors were more ingenious than I realized," our cheesemaker replied, showing her the ventilation equipment. "They understood airflow's importance for proper aging." She examined the mechanism with genuine interest. "Professor Weber, you know, the geologist from Bern, he has theories about cave breathing, how barometric pressure changes cause air to move in and out, like lungs." Her face colored slightly at mentioning Weber.
They worked together for an hour, mapping the old ventilation system from the equipment in the attic. Mathilde's knowledge of the chateau's history proved invaluable.
"Great-great-grandfather was obsessed with improvements," she explained. "He visited cheesemakers in France, Holland, even England. The oracle frustrated him. He couldn't explain it scientifically, so he tried to control everything else." "And the connection to your father's study?" She looked at him sharply. "You've noticed that too?" "Yes. One of the ventilation shafts runs behind the study chimney. Poor design, really. When Father burns his lamps late, the heat differential must affect the air pressure throughout the system." There it was, spoken casually but confirming our cheesemaker's suspicions. Yet Mathilde seemed unaware of the full implications. To her, it was merely an architectural curiosity, not the key to her family's prophetic cheese. Dr.
Rosenberg visited again on the 10th of August, ostensibly to treat a stable hand's broken finger, but really, our cheesemaker suspected, to escape his own stifling house. They sat in the dairy's coolest corner, drinking buttermilk and discussing the nature of causation. "Consider this," Rosenberg said, gesturing with his pipe. "A rooster crows, then the sun rises, every day without fail. A simple mind might conclude the rooster causes the sunrise. But we know better. Do we? Or have we simply replaced one set of superstitions with another? The Baron believes his cheese predicts market crashes. You believe in bacterial cultures and chemical reactions. Both are models for understanding chaos." Our cheesemaker considered this. But one model can be tested, measured, repeated. Can it? Can you repeat the exact conditions that create a perfect Gruyere? Every cow eating the same grass, every breath of air carrying the same spores, every degree of heat precisely controlled. Rosenberg smiled. "We like to think we've mastered nature, but we've simply gotten better at describing our ignorance." These conversations always left our cheesemaker unsettled in productive ways. That evening, teaching Anna about compound interest, she'd progressed remarkably in her studies, he found himself thinking about models and reality, about the stories people told themselves to make sense of an uncertain world. "Master," Anna said suddenly, breaking from their lesson, "is it true what Hans says, that you don't believe in the oracle?" He set down his chalk. "What do you think, Anna? You've been reading about markets for weeks now. Do you think a cheese can predict crashes?" She was quiet for a long moment, her intelligence wrestling with a lifetime of local tradition. I think people need to believe in something." And if believing in the oracle makes the Baron act cautiously, saves the estate from ruin, then maybe it doesn't matter if it's true. Wisdom from unexpected sources. Our cheesemaker nodded slowly. "You may be right." The heat finally broke on the 23rd of August with a thunderstorm that shook the chateau's ancient stones. Lightning illuminated the valley in stark, momentary revelations, and rain fell in sheets that turned the courtyard into a temporary lake. The Baron, instead of celebrating the cooling weather, grew anxious. Storms meant telegraph disruptions, meant being cut off from the constant flow of financial information he'd grown dependent on. Our cheesemaker stood in the 7th chamber during the storm's height, feeling the pressure changes through the limestone itself. The oracle sat on its pedestal, unchanged, no mysterious patterns appearing despite the atmospheric turmoil.
He made careful notes: barometric pressure falling rapidly, humidity spike, temperature differential between cave and surface maximum. If weather alone could trigger the oracle's prophecies, surely tonight would produce something. But the cheese remained simply cheese, aging with dignified slowness, keeping its secrets as it had for 60 years. In the storm's aftermath, with the valley washed clean and the air finally breathable, our cheesemaker climbed to the Baron's study on the pretense of delivering a special cheese for the Baron's digestion. Rosenberg had suggested it might help. The study was a monument to information addiction. Telegraph equipment, stock tickers, newspapers in 4 languages, charts of market prices covering every wall. "Magnificent storm," the Baron said absently, not looking up from his ledgers.
Though it's cost me 2 days of trading information from Paris. Our cheesemaker placed the cheese on a side table, noting the arrangement of oil lamps, 6 of them, their combined heat substantial. The chimney behind the Baron's desk was cold now, but when all those lamps burned during the Baron's regular all-night trading sessions, "Your cheese-making has improved production admirably," the Baron continued. "Hans tells me we're up 20% from last year." "The caves are remarkable, Baron. Their natural properties, properly understood, make excellence almost inevitable." The Baron looked up at that, his gray eyes sharp. "Properly understood? And do you understand our oracle as well?" A test, perhaps, or genuine curiosity. Our cheesemaker chose his words like choosing cheese for aging, carefully, with an eye toward future development. "I understand that your family has prospered for generations by observing patterns others miss."
That requires wisdom, whether the patterns are in cheese or in markets. The Baron smiled, apparently satisfied. "Indeed. My grandfather used to say that the oracle doesn't predict the future. It reveals the present that others are too blind to see." September painted the valley in shades of gold and rust, and with it came the harvest festival preparations that transformed the usually sedate chateau into something resembling a marketplace. Our cheesemaker watched from his dairy window as wagons arrived daily, bringing wine from neighboring vineyards, wheels of competing cheeses for the traditional tasting competition, and merchants hoping to secure contracts for the chateau's renowned products. Among these arrivals, on the 15th of September, came Jacques Mercier, wine merchant from Lyon, old friend of the Baron, and a man whose presence changed the chateau's atmosphere like vinegar changes milk. 46 years old, impeccably dressed even after a dusty journey, with eyes that evaluated everything they saw for potential profit. Our cheesemaker met him formally at dinner that evening. Mercier dominated the conversation with stories from French markets, the phylloxera blight destroying vineyards, the opportunities in importing American rootstock. But his eyes kept drifting to the Baron, and there was something calculating in his attention when the Baron mentioned recent market successes. "Your timing remains impeccable, Friedrich," Mercier said, raising his glass. "Selling before the May crash. Remarkable instinct." "Family wisdom," the Baron replied modestly, though pride colored his cheeks. "Indeed, the famous Kellenberg luck, or should I say, the oracle's blessing." The room grew quiet. Even the servants paused in their service. Speaking of the oracle to outsiders was unusual.
Hans, standing by the doorway, shifted uncomfortably. "Come now," Mercier continued smoothly. "We're old friends. Surely you can share the secret of your success." The Baron's laugh was forced. "No secret, Jacques. Just careful attention to market signals." But Mercier's interest had been piqued. Our cheesemaker could see it. Over the following days, as festival preparations intensified, the wine merchant found excuses to linger near the cave entrances, to ask seemingly innocent questions about cheese-making processes, to charm information from servants. It was Hans who finally confronted the situation, finding our cheesemaker during the morning inspection. "That Frenchman's been asking about the oracle," he said without preamble, "offering money for information." "And?" Hans's face darkened. "I've said nothing, but others might not be so careful. Anna's uncle from the village, he's been boasting in taverns about his niece working where the oracle lives."
After enough wine, who knows what stories grow? Our cheesemaker filed this away, another complication in an increasingly complex situation. That afternoon, he found Anna in tears behind the dairy, a letter crumpled in her hand. "My uncle," she managed between sobs. "He's arranged a marriage for me to a butcher's son from Gruyere. Says it's time I stopped filling my head with nonsense and became useful." The presumption of it angered our cheesemaker more than he expected. Anna had proven herself capable of understanding complex financial instruments, of grasping mathematics that eluded many educated men. To waste such a mind on a marriage she didn't want. "When?" he asked quietly. "After Harvest Festival. The butcher's family will come to meet me then." She wiped her eyes with her apron. "I suppose I always knew this would happen. Women like me don't get to choose." That evening, our cheesemaker made his own choice.
He sought out Mathilde in the library, where she was reading a treatise on mineralogy. "I need your help," he said simply. "For Anna." Mathilde listened to the situation, her face growing increasingly indignant. "The waste of it," she said finally. "I'll speak to Papa. We need a lady's maid who can read and write, someone to help with correspondence. The position would make her unsuitable for a butcher's son, too elevated." Plans within plans. The festival approached with its chaotic energy, and our cheesemaker found himself observing how everyone maneuvered for advantage. The Baron worked to impress neighboring nobility with his prosperity. Mercier cultivated connections that might reveal the oracle's secret. Hans sold information about which cheeses would likely win competitions based on his cave expertise. Even Anna's uncle sought to profit from his niece's proximity to wealth. On the 20th of September, disaster nearly struck.
Our cheesemaker, checking the 7th chamber at dawn, found Mercier there, standing before the oracle with a lamp raised high, examining its surface with intense concentration.
"Magnificent specimen," Mercier said without turning. 18 months old, I'd guess. Maybe 20. 19, our cheesemaker corrected. "And you're trespassing." Mercier turned with a merchant's smile. "Merely appreciating craftsmanship. The Baron speaks highly of your improvements here." "The Baron also values privacy." Of course. Mercier moved toward the exit, then paused. "You know, in Lyon, we have stories too, about cheeses that weep before disasters, wines that cloud before wars. Superstitions, we call them, but profitable superstitions for those who understand them." The threat was subtle but clear. Mercier suspected something, even if he didn't know what. Our cheesemaker watched him leave, then examined the oracle carefully.
No damage, but on the iron stand, barely visible, fresh scratches, as if someone had tried to measure or mark something. That afternoon brought another revelation. Mathilde found our cheesemaker in the dairy, her face flushed with excitement and anger in equal measure.
"Papa's done it," she announced. "He's arranged a marriage for me. To Mercier."
The shock of it rendered our cheesemaker momentarily speechless.
"But Mercier is old enough to be my father?" "Yes." "Rich enough to solve Papa's liquidity problems?" "Also, yes."
She laughed bitterly.
"You see, Papa's market successes have made him overconfident. He's leveraged heavily on railroad stocks, expecting another prediction from the oracle. But the oracle remains silent, and the notes are coming due."
The interconnections revealed themselves like veins in marble. The Baron's anxiety wasn't about markets crashing. It was about the oracle not warning him when to sell.
Mercier had sensed weakness and moved to exploit it, using marriage to gain access to the Kellenberg fortune and its mysterious source.
"What will you do?" Mathilde's smile was sharp as aged cheddar. "What women always do. Find a way around men's decisions. Professor Weber has a position waiting at the University of Bern. Not for me, officially, but as his assistant. We could elope during the festival chaos." "That's quite risky." "Everything worthwhile is." The festival began 2 days later with traditional Alp horn concerts and blessing of the cheeses. The chateau overflowed with visitors, merchants, local nobility, curious tourists drawn by the harvest celebrations. Our cheesemaker moved through the crowds, maintaining the cave's routines despite the chaos above.
He noticed everything. Mercier courting influential merchants, Hans conducting his side business with unusual boldness, Anna serving with mechanical precision while her uncle and the butcher's family watched from a corner table. In the caves, the oracle sat unchanged, no prophetic patterns appearing despite the Baron's nightly vigils in his study. The lamps burned until dawn now, the Baron desperate for some sign, some warning about when to sell his leveraged positions. The irony wasn't lost on our cheesemaker. The very desperation that kept the lamps burning might eventually create the conditions for the pattern to appear, but by then it could be too late. October brought its peculiar mountain light, sharp and golden, illuminating the chateau's stones like honey on bread. The festival had ended with neither disaster nor triumph. The butcher's family had returned to Gruyere without Anna, Mathilde had not eloped, and Mercier lingered still, a spider waiting in his web of negotiations. Our cheesemaker continued his observations, noting how the change of seasons affected the cave's breathing, how the cooling air created new patterns of circulation. On the night of October 7th, everything shifted. The pattern appeared again on the oracle, that distinctive crack of blue-green mold dividing the cheese's surface. But this time, our cheesemaker had been watching, had been present in the adjoining chamber when it began. The night before, the Baron's lamps had burned from sunset to dawn as he wrestled with telegraph reports of minor bank failures in Vienna. The heated air from his study, channeling through the old ventilation shaft, had created a perfect storm of conditions. Temperature differential, humidity spike, and most importantly, a particular quality of lamp oil the Baron had recently purchased. Cheaper stuff from a new supplier, burning less clean. Hans discovered the pattern at dawn, and within an hour the chateau transformed into its familiar crisis mode. The Baron, hollow-eyed from his night vigil,
stood before the oracle like a man granted reprieve from execution.
7 days, he whispered. Mercier, we must accelerate our negotiations. The marriage must happen before... Before what, Papa?
Matilda stood in the chamber entrance, still in her mourning robe, having followed the commotion.
Before your prophetic cheese saves us again?
The tension between father and daughter crackled like static before a storm. Mercier, ever the opportunist, stepped forward.
My dear Mathilde, your father only wants...
My father wants to sell me like one of his cheeses, she interrupted. Well-aged, good breeding, premium price.
She fled before anyone could respond. Our cheesemaker noticed Hans watching the oracle with an expression he'd never seen before, doubt mixed with calculation. Later, he understood why. That evening, while the Baron composed telegrams to his brokers, Hans approached our cheesemaker in the dairy. "You know something," he said without preamble, "about the oracle. I've watched you these months, making notes, measuring things." Our cheesemaker continued working his curds, maintaining the steady rhythm that good cheese demanded. "I know many things about cheese, Hans. Which knowledge concerns you?" "The pattern. It's not natural, is it? I mean, not supernatural." The question hung between them like morning mist. Our cheesemaker set aside his tools, studying the man who'd guarded these caves for 15 years.
What makes you ask this now? Hans's confession came in pieces, like curds separating from whey. He'd been selling information, yes, but carefully, ethically in his own mind, only confirming patterns that were already public, never revealing the oracle directly. But 3 local merchants had approached him separately, offering fortunes for the secret. Word was spreading. The oracle's reputation had grown too large. "If it's not real," Hans continued, "if there's some trick to it, then we're all complicit in a fraud. But if it is real..." He trailed off, unable to articulate the theological implications of cheese that could predict economic catastrophe. Our cheesemaker made a decision born of instinct rather than logic. "Come with me tonight, after the household sleeps. Bring a lamp." The hours until midnight stretched like pulled cheese. Anna served dinner with unusual clumsiness, her mind clearly elsewhere. The Baron ate nothing, drinking wine and studying market reports.
Mercier regaled the table with stories of Lyonnais society, painting pictures of the life Mathilde would enjoy as his wife. Mathilde herself remained silent, cutting her food into increasingly small pieces she didn't eat. At midnight, our cheesemaker met Hans in the 7th chamber. Together, they climbed on crates to examine the ventilation grate he'd discovered months earlier. Hans's expression as understanding dawned was something to behold. Wonder, disappointment, and relief battling across his features. "The Baron's lamps," he breathed. "When he studies all night, the heated air rises, channels through the old shaft, creates specific conditions of temperature and humidity. Combined with trace compounds from the lamp oil, it promotes this particular mold's growth in this precise pattern." Hans sat heavily on a crate. 15 years. 15 years I've believed. The belief isn't false, Hans. When the Baron wrestles all night with financial data, when he burns his lamps studying crisis indicators, he's usually right about crashes coming. The oracle doesn't predict, it reflects. It shows what the Baron already knows, but hasn't admitted. They sat in the cave's ancient darkness, processing this revelation. Finally, Hans spoke. "What do we do with this knowledge?" Before our cheesemaker could answer, footsteps echoed in the passage. Mathilde appeared, carrying her own lamp and, surprisingly, a leather satchel. "I thought I'd find you here," she said. "The caves are the only honest place in this chateau." She looked at the oracle, then at their guilty faces. "You've discovered it, haven't you? The mechanism?" Our cheesemaker explained briefly. Mathilde listened with the attention of a true scientist, asking clarifying questions, understanding immediately the implications. When he finished, she laughed, not bitterly this time, but with genuine amusement. "How perfect!"
How absolutely perfect. The oracle only speaks when Papa is already panicking about markets. It's not prophecy, it's anxiety made visible through cheese. She hefted her satchel. "Well, gentlemen, this simplifies my decision. I'm leaving tonight. Professor Weber has sent a carriage to the village. By morning, I'll be halfway to Bern." Hans started to protest about duty, family, reputation. Mathilde cut him off. "What reputation? As the daughter who believed in magic cheese? Or as the woman who chose science over superstition?" She turned to our cheesemaker. "Will you tell Papa?" The question carried weight. The Baron's wealth, the chateau's prosperity, the livelihood of everyone here, all balanced on the edge of this knowledge. Yet Mathilde deserved her freedom, deserved to pursue truth rather than tradition. "Your father will discover your absence at breakfast," he said carefully. "By then, pursuing you will be pointless." As for the oracle, he looked at Hans, including him in the decision. Perhaps some mysteries are worth preserving. Mathilde kissed both their cheeks, a gesture that would have scandalized society but seemed appropriate in this cave where truth had finally emerged. "Take care of Anna," she told our cheesemaker. "She has the makings of a true scholar. Don't let them waste her on that butcher's boy." She disappeared into the darkness, leaving Hans and our cheesemaker alone with the oracle and their shared secret. They descended the crates, replaced everything exactly as it had been. The pattern on the cheese seemed different now, not a divine message, but a record of human worry transformed through chemistry and coincidence into something that looked like prophecy. December wrapped the chateau in pristine snow that muffled sounds and made the world seem smaller, more intimate. The scandal of Mathilde's elopement had subsided into resigned acceptance. The Baron, after his initial rage, had publicly declared his daughter dead to him, while privately corresponding with her through Dr. Rosenberg. The predicted market crash had failed to materialize on schedule, arriving 3 days late, which the Baron explained as the oracle accounting for feast day delays in trading. Mercier had departed in November, his marriage plans ruined, though not without purchasing a significant quantity of cheese and leaving hints that he'd return. Our cheesemaker found winter suited his investigations. The cold air made the ventilation patterns in the caves more visible, breath misting in revealing currents. He'd developed a precise understanding of the mechanism now. When the Baron burned his lamps for more than 14 hours continuously, using the cheaper oil from Zurich rather than the refined oil from Geneva, and when the external temperature dropped below freezing while the study remained heated above 20 degrees centigrade, then, and only then, would the oracle develop its prophetic crack within 3 to 5 days. Knowledge, however, proved more burden than liberation. On the feast of St. Nicholas, Anna approached him with troubling news. "The servants in the village are taking wagers," she said, having returned from the market, "about when the oracle will next speak. Hans's loose tongue after drinking has made it common gossip that something special exists in our caves."
Indeed, Hans had grown increasingly erratic since October's revelation.
The weight of the secret, combined with guilt over his past information selling, had driven him to the wine bottle with unfortunate frequency. Our cheesemaker had found him twice sleeping in the caves, reeking of alcohol, mumbling apologies to cheeses that couldn't grant absolution.
"What should we do?" Anna asked. She'd changed these past months. The Baron had indeed elevated her to assistant secretary, handling his correspondence in Mathilde's absence. The position paid well enough that her uncle couldn't force the butcher's marriage, though he still pressed. "We maintain the routines," our cheesemaker replied. "Consistency is everything in cheesemaking, as in life." But consistency proved challenging when the variables kept shifting. The Baron, anxious about his leveraged positions and desperate for another oracle prophecy, had taken to burning his lamps continuously. 3 times in December, he'd created the exact conditions necessary, but no pattern appeared. Why?
Our cheesemaker eventually discovered the answer. Mercier's parting gift had been to convince the Baron to try a new lamp oil supplier, one whose product burned too cleanly to create the necessary chemical traces. Christmas Eve brought unexpected visitors. Dr. Rosenberg arrived for dinner, accompanied by a young couple who turned out to be Mathilde and Professor Weber, secretly married and briefly returned to attempt reconciliation. The dinner was excruciating. The Baron maintaining icy formality, while obviously desperate to embrace his daughter, Mathilde defending her choices with scientific rhetoric that only widened the gap, Weber trying to discuss geological formations with anyone who'd listen. Our cheesemaker escaped to the caves, finding peace in the eternal quiet. But even there, disturbance found him. Hans sat before the oracle, quite drunk, talking to it like an old friend. 43 years my family served this house, he slurred.
My grandfather carved that stand you rest on. And what for? For a lie that's not even a proper lie, just accident masquerading as meaning.
All meaning is accident arranged into pattern, our cheesemaker offered, sitting beside him. Hans laughed bitterly. Listen to you, philosophizing. You weren't raised believing this cheese could save or damn us. You didn't spend 15 years thinking you guarded something sacred. He pulled out a flask, offered it. The brandy was rough, local, honest. I sold information, you know. Not about the oracle directly, but hints, suggestions. Made enough to buy my sister's dowry, my nephew's apprenticeship. Was that wrong if the oracle itself is false? The oracle isn't false, Hans. It's just different than we thought. The Baron's intuition about markets transformed into visible pattern.
The wisdom is real, only the mechanism was misunderstood.
They sat in companionable silence, passing the flask, while above them Christmas celebrations continued. Finally, Hans spoke again. The Baron's lamps haven't been working. Wrong oil. He's been asking me if the caves are too warm, too cold, if something's changed. And what do you tell him? Nothing. Everything's as it's always been. Hans stood, swaying slightly. But that's not true, is it? Everything's changed because now we know. Knowledge ruins everything, doesn't it? Our cheesemaker considered this. Or transforms it into something more honest. January brought the kind of cold that made the chateau's stones crack with complaint. The Baron grew increasingly frantic, his leveraged positions deteriorating while the oracle remained silent.
He tried everything. Different cheeses placed near the oracle, hoping for sympathetic magic. Prayers in the castle chapel. Even bringing a fortune-teller from Freiburg, who declared the cheese was resting its prophetic powers. On January 15th, desperation drove the Baron to summon our cheesemaker to his study. The room was a disaster of papers, telegraph forms, market reports scattered like snow. The Baron himself looked aged a decade since spring, his careful grooming abandoned. "The oracle won't speak," he said without preamble. "You're the expert. What's wrong with it?" Our cheesemaker studied this man who'd hired him, who'd built a fortune on coincidence, interpreted as providence. "Perhaps, Baron, the oracle has already spoken. The absence of a sign is itself a sign. That you should trust your own judgment rather than waiting for patterns in cheese." The Baron's laugh was hollow. "My judgment? My judgment is corrupted by too much information, too many variables."
The oracle simplified things. When it spoke, I acted. Now, he gestured at the chaos of papers. Now I drown in possibilities. That night, our cheesemaker made his own moral choice. He visited the Baron's study after midnight, bringing a particular lamp oil he'd sourced from the same supplier the Baron had used in spring. He replaced the oil in 3 of the Baron's lamps, then returned to his room, telling himself he was merely restoring proper conditions for cheese aging. By January 20th, the pattern had appeared, a perfect crack across the oracle's surface. The Baron's relief was palpable, his faith restored. He sold his leveraged positions immediately, taking losses but avoiding the complete ruin that would have come when the market crashed on January 28th, exactly 7 days after the oracle's prophecy. February arrived with peculiar weather. Warm days that melted snow from roofs, followed by freezing nights that turned the melt into treacherous ice daggers. The chateau existed in a strange suspension, like the valley itself caught between seasons. The Baron, saved from ruin by January's prophecy, had regained some composure but remained changed, more thoughtful, less certain of old truths. Our cheesemaker perfected his understanding of the oracle's mechanism through careful experimentation. In the deep winter nights, while the household slept, he would burn specific combinations of oils in the 7th chamber, observing how different compounds affected the mold's growth patterns. He produced 3 deliberate patterns, none of them the prophetic crack, but artistic swirls that would have delighted any mycologist. Knowledge was power, but more importantly, knowledge was responsibility. Anna had grown into her role as assistant secretary with remarkable capability. On the morning of February 10th, she brought our cheesemaker an interesting proposition.
"The Baron wants to modernize the cheese production," she said, showing him correspondence from equipment manufacturers in Zurich. "Steam-powered pressing, temperature-controlled aging rooms, industrial-scale production. He says tradition must evolve or die." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The Baron, whose fortune depended on ancient prophecy, embracing industrial progress. Our cheesemaker studied the proposals, recognizing quality equipment but also seeing the threat to everything that made Kellenberg cheese unique. "What do you think?" Anna asked. "I think the Baron seeks control over something, having learned he can't control markets or prophecies." That afternoon brought an unexpected reunion. Hans returned from a week's absence. He'd been visiting his sister in Interlaken, officially, though our cheesemaker suspected it was more escape than visit. But Hans seemed changed, clearer-eyed, carrying himself with rediscovered purpose.
"I've been thinking," Hans announced, finding our cheesemaker in the 3rd chamber.
about truth and lies and the spaces between. My grandfather, who built that stand for the oracle, he believed, never questioned, never doubted. Was he foolish?
Was he happy? Our cheesemaker countered.
Completely. Died thinking he'd served something greater than himself.
Hans ran his hand along the ancient limestone.
Maybe that's worth more than truth.
They worked together that day like they hadn't in months, turning cheeses, checking humidity, maintaining the eternal rhythms of the cave. Hans shared stories of his grandfather, of the old baron who'd first noticed the oracle's patterns, of generations who'd found meaning in mysterious mold. Our cheesemaker listened, understanding that Hans was rebuilding his world, choosing which truths to keep and which to release. Dr. Rosenberg visited on February 18th, ostensibly for the baron's health, but really to deliver news.
"Mathilde is pregnant," he announced privately to our cheesemaker. "She wanted you to know. Says you'll understand the metaphor. New life growing in darkness, transformation requiring proper conditions." Indeed, our cheesemaker did understand. That evening, he composed a letter to Mathilde through Rosenberg, describing his recent experiments with controlled mold cultivation, knowing she'd appreciate both the science and the subtext. February 20th brought crisis. The Baron, studying market reports, had begun his familiar pattern of all-night lamp burning. Our cheesemaker, checking the caves at dawn, discovered the beginning of a crack pattern on the oracle, but wrong, unnatural. Someone had scored the cheese surface with a knife, encouraging mold growth along the artificial line. Hans stood behind him, guilty but defiant. "3 merchants from Zurich are coming tomorrow. They've offered 10,000 francs for confirmation of the oracle's next prophecy." The money could help 20 families in the village make it through winter. The violation of it struck our cheesemaker physically. Not just the cheese, though damaging such a perfectly aged wheel was crime enough, but the breach of trust, the corruption of even their complicated truth.
"So you'd manufacture prophecy?" "You did. In January, you changed the Baron's lamp oil. I saw you." The accusation hung between them like morning mist. Our cheesemaker couldn't deny it. He had crossed that line, justified it as restoration rather than manipulation, but the distinction was philosophy, not fact. "We need to fix this," he said finally. Together they carefully removed the damaged surface layer, treating the exposed cheese with precise salt solution to prevent infection. The oracle would bear scars, but subtle ones. The merchants from Zurich would find nothing obvious.
That night, our cheesemaker called a meeting in the caves. Himself, Hans, and surprisingly, Anna, who'd proven herself trustworthy beyond question. By lamplight, surrounded by thousands of aging cheeses, they held council. "We 3 know the truth," our cheesemaker began. "The question is what we do with it." Anna spoke first, with the clarity of someone who'd thought deeply.
"The truth would destroy the Baron. Not financially, he's clever enough at markets, but spiritually. His identity rests on being heir to ancient wisdom."
Hans nodded slowly. "And the village economy depends on the chateau's prosperity. The oracle brings tourists, traders, attention. Without mystery, we're just another valley making cheese." "Yet living with deception corrodes the soul," our cheesemaker added. "I've felt it these months, knowing but not speaking." They debated through the night, 3 people holding the fate of a legend in their hands. By dawn, they'd reached a conclusion that satisfied none of them completely, but felt sustainable. The oracle would continue, but managed. Our cheesemaker would monitor conditions,
ensuring patterns appeared only when the Baron's genuine market anxieties warranted them, maintaining the strange symbiosis between intuition and manifestation. Hans would guard against external manipulation while slowly reducing his information selling. Anna would use her position to gradually introduce rational financial planning alongside oracle consultation. "We're choosing to maintain an illusion," Anna said as they prepared to return to their duties. "No," our cheesemaker corrected. "We're choosing to preserve a truth that wears the mask of illusion. The Baron's wisdom about markets is real. The oracle merely makes it visible." The merchants from Zurich arrived that afternoon, suspicious and eager. They found nothing. No pattern, no prophecy, just an excellent cheese aging in a historic cave.
Hans performed his role perfectly, neither confirming nor denying, maintaining the mystery that was more valuable than any truth. The February revelation changed everything and nothing. March came in with unusual warmth, fooling the fruit trees into early blooming, a dangerous deception, as mountain springs often were. Our cheesemaker watched the Baron navigate his financial affairs with renewed confidence, unaware that his oracle now had human curators, ensuring its prophecies aligned with genuine market wisdom rather than random atmospheric conditions. On March 3rd, Mercier returned unannounced, his carriage arriving at dawn like a crow settling on a fence. He brought gifts, wine from his estates, business proposals for cheese distribution across France, and, most surprisingly, a letter of apology to the Baron for his ungentlemanly pursuit of Mathilde. "I've been thinking," Mercier told our cheesemaker, finding him in the dairy that afternoon, "about mysteries and markets, about how belief creates value more surely than any intrinsic worth." His merchant's eyes were calculating but not unkind. "I don't need to understand the oracle to profit from its reputation, do I?" A practical man's wisdom. Our cheesemaker continued working his curds while Mercier outlined a proposal. Exclusive distribution rights for Kellenberg cheese in France, marketed with subtle hints about their mysterious properties. "Not claiming prophecy," Mercier clarified, "just allowing imagination to flourish." The Baron, when presented with this offer, saw providence. "The oracle brings prosperity even in silence," he declared, signing contracts that would triple the chateau's income. Anna, taking notes, caught our cheesemaker's eye. They both recognized the beautiful irony of it. March 8th brought a crisis that tested their manufactured equilibrium. The Baron, excited by Mercier's deals, had been burning his lamps continuously for 3 nights, studying expansion plans and distribution networks. The conditions were perfect for an oracle manifestation, but this time the pattern appeared wrong. Instead of a single crack, the cheese developed a spiderweb of lines, beautiful but unprecedented. Hans found it first, going pale at the implications. "What does it mean?" he asked our cheesemaker, real fear in his voice. Our cheesemaker studied the pattern, recognizing it from his experiments. This happened when 2 different oil types mixed in the lamps, creating conflicting air currents. The Baron must have refilled some lamps with old oil, others with new. But Hans didn't need technical explanations. He needed meaning. "Perhaps the oracle speaks of complexity," our cheesemaker suggested. "Not a single crash, but interconnected changes. Markets evolving rather than collapsing." This interpretation, when Hans nervously presented it to the Baron,
proved prophetic in its own way. Over the following week, instead of one dramatic crash, the markets underwent a series of small adjustments, what newspapers would later call the gentle correction of March 1884. Dr. Rosenberg arrived on March 15th with news that Mathilde had given birth, a healthy daughter named Marie, after our cheesemaker's late wife, though this connection was known only to him and Mathilde through their correspondence. The Baron, grandfather to a child he'd never acknowledged publicly, spent the evening staring at the oracle as if it might provide guidance for navigating this personal complexity.
Family patterns are harder to read than market ones,
Rosenberg observed, joining our cheesemaker for their traditional philosophical discussion.
The Baron loves his daughter, hates her betrayal, takes pride in her intelligence, resents her independence. How does one reconcile such contradictions?
The same way cheese reconciles milk and time,
Our cheesemaker replied.
slow transformation, accepting that the end product differs from what we initially imagined.
Anna's education had progressed remarkably. She now handled most of the Baron's correspondence, her understanding of financial instruments surpassing many bankers. On March 20th, she presented our cheesemaker with a proposal she'd drafted. A workers' collective for the village, allowing families to pool resources and share profits from the chateau's growing prosperity.
The Baron will never agree, Hans said when she shared the idea with their small council of secret keepers.
Not if it's presented as revolution, Anna agreed.
But if it's framed as ancient tradition, communal wisdom like the oracle itself.
Brilliant. Our cheesemaker helped to refine the proposal, couching modern cooperative principles in language that evoked medieval guilds and alpine traditions. When Anna presented it to the Baron, he saw it as restoring historical practices rather than embracing socialist ideas. March 25th brought an unexpected test. A professor from the University of Zurich arrived, claiming to study traditional cheese-making, but clearly investigating the oracle. He had modern instruments, barometers, thermometers, even an early photographic apparatus to document mold patterns. "Science comes to challenge superstition," Hans muttered nervously. But our cheesemaker saw opportunity. He volunteered to guide the professor's tour, controlling what was observed and how. In the seventh chamber, he explained the oracle as a confluence of perfect conditions: limestone composition, consistent temperature, specific humidity levels, and yes, perhaps trace elements from the chateau's architecture that created unique growth patterns.
So it's purely natural phenomenon? The professor asked, adjusting his spectacles.
As natural as the correlation between sunspot activity and grain prices, our cheesemaker replied, a comparison he'd learned from Anna's economic studies. Patterns exist throughout nature. Human wisdom lies in recognizing which patterns matter. The professor left satisfied that he'd uncovered mundane truth behind mountain legend. His published paper would later describe the oracle as an interesting example of how consistent environmental conditions can produce seemingly meaningful patterns in fungal growth. Accurate enough to satisfy science, vague enough to preserve mystery. As March ended, our cheesemaker stood in the seventh chamber for his evening inspection. The oracle bore its various scars and patterns like a map of the year's anxieties and revelations. Tomorrow would mark 1 year since his arrival at Chateau Kellenberg. He'd come seeking escape from grief, found himself instead curator of other people's hopes and fears. Anna appeared in the doorway. "The Baron's approved the collective," she announced. "He's also promoting me to full secretary. says I've proven that wisdom isn't limited by birth or gender." She paused, then added quietly, "I know what you've done for me. The education, the protection from that marriage, now this position. Why?" Why indeed? Perhaps because in her sharp intelligence and determined rise, he saw what Marie might have become. Perhaps because maintaining the oracle's secret required allies. Or perhaps because in this strange household, built on beneficial deception, enabling one person's genuine growth felt like necessary balance. "Knowledge shouldn't be hoarded," he repeated his old answer. But Anna's smile suggested she understood the deeper truth, that in teaching her, he'd found purpose beyond grief, beyond cheese, beyond even the strange responsibility of maintaining prophecy. Spring returned to the valley with the same eternal promise it had carried since these mountains were young, before humans carved caves into limestone, before anyone thought to age milk into gold. Our cheesemaker stood at his window on this first morning of April, exactly 1 year since his arrival, watching dawn paint the peaks rose and amber. Time to take stock, as one does with properly aged cheese, testing its readiness for the world. The chateau had transformed subtly but profoundly. The workers' collective Anna had designed was already showing benefits. Families investing their small shares wisely, children attending school longer, the village developing a prosperity that didn't depend entirely on the Baron's whims. Mercier's distribution network had made Kellenberg cheese fashionable in Paris salons, where hostesses served it with hints about its mysterious properties, each whisper adding value to what was, in the end, excellently crafted but entirely normal cheese. The Baron had aged too, though perhaps ripened was the better word. His hair had gone completely silver, lending him a distinguished air that matched his new role as elder statesman of regional finance. He still consulted the oracle, still burned his lamps through anxious nights, but now he also listened to Anna's rational analyses, balancing prophecy with prudence. That morning brought a letter that would complete the year's strange circle.
Mathilde wrote directly to her father for the first time since her elopement, including a photograph of baby Marie. The Baron read it in his study, then did something unprecedented. He brought it to the caves, to the oracle chamber, as if seeking blessing, or perhaps offering proof of continuity. Our cheesemaker found him there an hour later, holding the photograph up to lamplight, tears making silver tracks through his careful whiskers. "She has the Kellenberg eyes," the Baron said simply. "Gray, like storm clouds, like wisdom gathering." Strange how patterns repeat across generations, how children inherit more than eyes and temperament. They inherit the stories their families tell themselves, the myths that make meaning from chaos. Little Marie would grow up hearing about the oracle, perhaps believing, perhaps not, but certainly shaped by its legend. Hans had found his peace with their shared secret. He'd stopped selling information entirely, instead becoming something of a storyteller, regaling tourists with tales of the oracle that were entirely true in their effect, if not their cause. He'd grown into the role of traditions keeper, understanding finally that tradition's power lay not in factual truth, but in communal meaning. "You know what I've realized?" Hans told our cheesemaker that afternoon as they turned the massive wheels in Chamber 3. "My grandfather's faith wasn't misplaced. The oracle did predict crashes, just not how he thought. When the Baron worried enough to burn those lamps all night, crashes were usually coming.
The cheese just made visible what was already true. Dr. Rosenberg visited that evening for what had become a monthly tradition: dinner and philosophy, wine and wisdom. They sat in the garden where early vegetables pushed through soil, that eternal optimism of growth despite all evidence of winter's return.
"I've been thinking about your oracle," Rosenberg said, pipe smoke wreathing his wild hair. "It's rather like medicine, isn't it? Half of healing is the patient's belief in the cure. Does it matter if the mechanism is understood, so long as the effect is real?"
Our cheesemaker considered this, sipping wine that had aged in Mercier's cellar since before he was born. "Perhaps understanding the mechanism is a luxury for those of us behind the curtain. The audience needs only the performance." Spoken like a true philosopher. Or a charlatan. Sometimes I wonder if there's a difference. Anna joined them as evening settled, having finished the day's correspondence. She'd grown into her authority with grace, managing to be both respectful of tradition and subtly revolutionary. The butcher's son had married a miller's daughter. Anna remained free to shape her own future. "I've been accepted," she announced quietly, producing a letter from her pocket.
"The commercial college in Zurich offers a correspondence course in advanced accounting. The Baron has agreed to sponsor my studies."
They toasted her success with the good wine, three conspirators celebrating one real victory amid their carefully maintained illusion. Anna would learn, would rise, would perhaps one day run estates of her own. The oracle had given her that chance, in its roundabout way. As night deepened, our cheesemaker made his final rounds through the caves. Each chamber held its own atmosphere, its own population of wheels in various stages of becoming. In the 7th chamber, the oracle sat on its iron stand, bearing the traces of a year's manipulations and revelations. The current surface showed no pattern, just the beautiful complexity of natural aging. He thought about his first night here, lying in his narrow bed, wondering what strangeness he'd entered.
Now he knew. He'd entered a story already centuries in progress, become a character in a narrative about belief and value, tradition and change. His role was neither hero nor villain, but something more complex. A craftsman who'd learned that his craft extended beyond cheese to the cultivation of meaning itself. The sound of footsteps interrupted his meditation. The Baron descended into the chamber, carrying not a lamp, but a bottle and 2 glasses. "I know," he said simply, pouring cognac that glowed amber in the lamplight. "I've known since February, when the pattern appeared, but felt managed, deliberate." Our cheesemaker accepted the glass, waiting. Confession, like cheese, couldn't be rushed. "My grandfather suspected too," the Baron continued. "Left notes I found last week, hidden in the binding of an old ledger. He'd noticed the correlation with the lamp oil, the ventilation. But he chose to maintain the fiction, said it served a purpose greater than truth." They stood in comfortable silence, 2 men sharing the weight of necessary deception. Finally, the Baron spoke again. "Will you stay? The chateau needs a master craftsman, but more than that, it needs someone who understands that craft includes maintaining mysteries as well as making cheese." Our cheesemaker thought of Marie, 5 years in the ground, who'd have wanted him to find purpose again. Of Anna, building her future on education he'd provided. Of Hans, finding peace with comfortable uncertainty. Of Mathilde and her daughter, carrying the story forward in their own way. Of this Baron, wise enough to choose meaning over mere fact. "I'll stay," he said. "The cheese still needs turning.
The caves need tending. The oracle needs... He paused, searching for the right word. Curating? The Baron suggested with a slight smile.
Precisely. They finished their cognac in the ancient darkness, surrounded by wheels of aging cheese, each one a small miracle of transformation. Above them, the chateau settled into sleep, while below, in caves that had sheltered secrets since the 13th century, the oracle continued its slow metamorphosis, neither prophetic nor mundane, but something more valuable, a mirror for human hopes and fears, rendered in blue-green mold and limestone-filtered time. Our cheesemaker climbed the worn stone steps to his room, his body tired but his mind at peace. Tomorrow he would rise before dawn, descend into the caves, and continue the work, not just making cheese, but maintaining a mystery that gave meaning to an entire valley. It was good work, necessary work, the kind that required both skill and wisdom. Through his window, stars wheeled above the Alps in their eternal patterns, indifferent to human interpretation, but beautiful nonetheless. Somewhere in Bern, a baby named Marie slept in her crib, inheriting a world of stories she'd someday choose to believe or revise. The future spread out like curds in a vat, ready for pressing into whatever shape wisdom and circumstance would allow. The oracle would speak again when needed, its prophecies as real as the anxiety that created them. And our cheesemaker would be there, tending the balance between truth and meaning, craft and mystery, ensuring that sometimes, in the darkness of ancient caves, cheese could still predict the future, not through magic, but through the older sorcery of human pattern-making, that endless quest to find meaning in the beautiful randomness of mold.